But with war, you never know. Things change. People go into war, think they're going to win the war, and then they get their asses kicked, and they lose their country, and they lose millions of lives. Nobody goes into a war thinking they're going to lose. They go in. I'm sure that Ukraine thought they were going to win. It's going to be, we're going to win. You're going to beat somebody that's 15 times your size. Biden shouldn't have let that happen. Biden shouldn't have. The man was grossly incompetent. He should have never been there. That would have never happened. But you don't go into a war that's 15 times your size.
It's Ken Harbaugh with the MeidasTouch Network. Ukraine did not start this war. It did not choose to take on an aggressor 15 times its size. Ukraine was attacked unprovoked as part of Vladimir Putin's imperial project to restore and expand the Russian Empire. And every cabinet member surrounding Trump at this meeting knows that. Yet they have been unable or unwilling to get him to stop saying this. Try to imagine how this comes across to Ukrainians who have spent the last 3 years and 8 months enduring constant Russian assaults, seeing their cities bombed, their loved ones murdered, and being told by the so-called leader of the free world that it is their fault. It begs the question, why does our president keep spewing this lie? I think it's clear, especially after watching his fawning behavior towards Vladimir Putin in Alaska, that Donald Trump has been compromised. Not as a willing Russian agent. That conclusion would require more proof than I have, but as an asset who has not only benefited enormously from Russian disinformation campaigns directed at our country, but who has actually come to believe in the substance of those campaigns. Whenever Donald Trump talks about Ukraine and Russia, it's as if he's living in an alternate reality. But that alternate reality isn't an accident. It's one that many Americans have come to believe. And it is the result of a decades-long campaign by the Kremlin to sow disinformation and discord throughout our politics. No one knows this better than my guest today, Olga Lautman. She is one of our nation's foremost Russia experts and the creator and co-host of the podcast, The Kremlin File, where she dissects Russia's efforts to destabilize Western democracies. Olga's parents emigrated from the Soviet Union, and she maintains strong familial ties to this day with Ukraine. Here's our conversation. Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I'm joined by Olga Lautman, a Russia analyst and investigative researcher whose work exposes Kremlin corruption, disinformation, and covert influence operations around the world. Olga, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for having me.
As you said before we hit record, I cannot believe we are stuck in this timeline. Your last Substack post jumped out at me. I read almost all of them, but this one struck a chord. I'm going to read the title. Nazis, the Kremlin, and Trump. What a trifecta. And look, this is in keeping with a recent theme here. We've had Chris Goldsmith on pretty regularly talking about just how pervasive this extremist bent in the new regime is. I mean, ICE itself is an internal extremist police force that appears to answer only to Donald Trump. Give us the short version of the nexus with Russia.
It was a very systematic way with a specific KGB playbook that they used to attack the 2016 election, to prime the ground. That began around 2008. Once they saw Obama come to power and they saw the racism and the burning of effigies, this is exactly when they got to work. And we all know the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis were instrumental to Trump winning 2016. The evangelicals were. We focused on that last week of how Russia cultivated the evangelicals for over a decade. And now we are, this week we're focusing on the Nazis. So then we have this group that came, sprung up in the United States called the Base. Not coincidentally, I'm sure, after Al-Qaeda.
Right.
Which,
Al-Qaeda in Arabic means the base.
Yeah. So they sprung up, and the founder of the group was in St. Petersburg. Now, this base is extremely dangerous. They're a domestic terrorist group. They have chapters across the globe. They have sent members to St. Petersburg to paramilitary camps for training. And under Trump, and Kash Patel, who have dismantled, the domestic extremism task force, they now have really become stronger to the point that they have, over the past few months, been openly recruiting to carry out assassinations and sabotage operations in Ukraine.
Hey, it's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who's been following and supporting this show and this channel. None of it happens without you. And if you haven't yet subscribed to my Substack page, I'd really appreciate the follow. It's a great way to make sure you never miss an episode. It's free to sign up. And if you're able to pitch in a few bucks, every dollar goes back into the show. Just search for The Ken Harbaugh Show on Substack or click the link below. Thanks. For Putin, this has to be largely opportunistic. The ideological alignment doesn't really matter to him, right? This is about, what do we call it, destabilization operations in his strategic adversaries, rivals around the world, in obviously Ukraine, but in the US and the UK.
Germany.
He'll go to bed with, right. He doesn't care who he's working with or their ideology, as long as they can be deployed as a thorn in the side of the United States and others. But it is especially ironic, isn't it, given the whole idea of Russia as the country that stopped Nazism, that stopped Hitler, that they are now partnering, and not just partnering, but elevating and funding Nazi groups.
I mean, this has been the case for decades. And when it comes to Russian security services, and Putin too, but I mean, this is more on Russian security services and their operations, they don't have an ideology. They infiltrated the evangelical groups through traditional values, basically aligning with them because they were pushing back against LGBTQ plus movements, against feminism, against everything that, represents liberalism and whatnot. So they partnered with them, pushing these traditional values and this was like the line to get to them. Another line at the same time in parallel was through the Nazis and the white supremacist groups. So when it comes to Russia's security services, they just don't have an ideology. They will, and I've monitored these operations, they will stage pro-Second Amendment protest and at the same time stage an anti-gun protest in the same place at the same time. Same thing with, Black Lives Matter and White Lives Matter. Same place, same time.
And how does this work on the ground? Because I'm sure a lot of people are wondering, well, what do you mean they support the evangelical community? I mean, in the case of their support for these Nazi groups, some of it is direct support. It is hosting Nazi leaders in St. Petersburg and things like that. But when you talk about the provocations and the agitation in our politics, that is largely influence campaigns, right? That is online, that is disinformation. Can you talk about their actual tactics for getting involved in this stuff, and like how do they infiltrate the evangelical community and manipulate the divisiveness that leads to?
So when it came to the evangelical community, it was really more about influence operations, although, again, Russia's Orthodox Church, which we laid out last week, is basically a front and an arm of Russian intelligence operations. And I mean, I've said this for so long, and finally you have, countries in Europe who basically are beginning to shut down these churches because it's a national security threat, only because they not only organize operations inside the church, but keep it as it's a hub basically for Russian agents to stage their operations recruitment. So when it came to the evangelical, I mean, it was done mainly through the Orthodox Church, through these traditional values. It was inviting evangelical leaders to Moscow, who then would come and basically whitewash. Now, this is happening after the annexation of Crimea, after the invasion of Georgia and the atrocities they committed there in 2008. And they basically were making Putin as a hero, painting Russia as the savior country, that will save this globe from whatever hell the evangelicals believe we're heading to. So it was through influence operations, but it intersected with spies, because then you had Maria Butina, who was a Russian agent, her job here was specifically to infiltrate evangelical groups, to move to the Republican Party and the prayer breakfast.
Wasn't the NRA implicated in that as well?
That was chapter 3. We did a whole thing on the NRA. Basically, Russia in parallel was running operations infiltrating the NRA. At the same time, they were infiltrating the evangelical community. At the same time, they were working with the Nazi groups and, to create operations to destabilize the United States. And then by 2015, they really see that Trump is the one, like late 2015, that he is the one who's, has the highest probability to get into the White House, and then they throw everything at him. But initially, their goal was anyone but Hillary Clinton. That was their goal, and this is why they went to every single route, which then in 2016 all fused together. The NRA movement, the evangelicals, the neo-Nazis and white supremacists, all the extremist groups. So this is why I say it was such a multifaceted operation, coming from every single angle. And like you made the point, it's not about that they have an ideology. Their ideology is to destroy the West.
I would love to try to end on a somewhat more positive note. We just passed Ukraine's Independence Day, and I would love your reflections on the spirit of the Ukrainian people. As a Ukrainian, I would just love your perspective on how that nation has weathered this unbelievable onslaught from one of the most powerful nuclear armed countries in the world.
It's devastating, but we've been dealing with this for 11 years now. Now it's just, escalated across the whole country, but Russia initially attacked in 2014. And frankly, this is, it's over a century old, because, Stalin killed 5+ million Ukrainians during Holodomor, which finally, I don't understand why it took several decades to recognize that as a genocide, but this was a man-made famine to erase Ukrainian identity. So honestly, as a Ukrainian, none of this is new. But we are always hopeful. We will never give up. We will fight for our land. We will fight for our identity, for, our history. Just so people understand, it's not just that Russia, is in a war. This is not a war. Their targets are Ukrainian civilians. They have stolen tens of thousands of Ukrainian children to re-educate them as Russians and basically erase their Ukrainian heritage. So that's my reflections. The fight continues. I hope Americans honestly get a little bit of the Ukrainian spirit, because we ourselves are watching our democracy collapse in front of our eyes. And I hope, that Americans get the Ukrainian spirit to defend their ideals and democracy, and to fight, for what every single military person bled for, to defend our democracy, our freedoms, and everything.
Olga, well, thank you. We'll have to leave it there. Always appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Good having you.
Thank you.
Love this video? Support independent media and unlock exclusive content, ad-free videos, and custom emojis by becoming a paid member of our YouTube channel today. You can also gift memberships to others. Let's keep growing together.